Caleb smelled him before he saw him. Smoked cedar and frozen ozone. A scent he had spent 12 years trying to forget. 12 years of residency, fellowship, and attending shifts that blurred into one long sleepless campaign to rebuild himself into someone who did not remember what an alpha's pheromones felt like when they meant safety. The double doors of the cardiac ICU swung open, and there it was. Not a memory. Not a phantom trace lingering on an old sweatshirt he should have thrown away. Real. Present. Walking through his hospital like it had every right to be there. His hands started shaking. Caleb's hands never shook. He was a cardiothoracic surgeon. His hands were the single most expensive insurance liability in this building. He could tie sutures smaller than a human hair. He could repair a mitral valve while a patient's blood ran on bypass. He did not shake because someone walked into a room. But Cale was here, and Cale's eyes had just locked onto his from across the ICU. Dark. Unreadable. The same eyes that had looked at him across a high school chemistry lab table 12 years ago, back when the world was simpler and Caleb still believed that wanting something badly enough meant you got to keep it. For one horrible, suspended second, neither of them moved. The cardiac monitor beeped. A nurse called out a lab value. The hospital kept turning, indifferent to the fact that Caleb Nolan's entire carefully constructed life had just developed a catastrophic fracture. Caleb turned the corner, pressed his back against the cold wall of the medication alcove, and tried to remember how to breathe. Caleb presented as an Omega at 13. His father, a Beta who had built a construction company from nothing, cried for exactly 1 hour in his truck before he came back inside and told Caleb that nothing had changed. He lied, but he lied beautifully. He hugged Caleb and said, "So you're a little more yourself than we thought." So what? His mother, an Omega who had worked as a nurse until a hospital's board decided a pregnant Omega in the ICU was distracting, cried for 3 days. Not because she was disappointed. She cried because she knew what the world did to Omegas who wanted too much. And Caleb had always wanted too much. He had been a sick child. Not dramatically, so no heroic surgeries. No Make-A-Wish Foundation visits. Just a body that never quite kept up. Asthma that sent him to the emergency room every winter. A heart murmur that the doctors said was innocent, but that made his mother watch him sleep. From age 4 to 10, he knew the pediatric ward of Portland General better than his own elementary school. He knew which vending machines had the good crackers. He knew that the night nurse named Mari let him stay up to watch cartoons if he promised not to tell. He knew that his mother slept in the hard plastic chair beside his bed so often that her back never really stopped hurting. The asthma finally settled when he was 11. The murmur closed on its own. His body, as if apologizing for the difficult childhood, grew tall and lean. But the hospital never left him. Not really. He watched the doctors at Portland General, and he did not see the beeping machines or the fluorescent lights or the parents crying in hallways. He saw people who walked into rooms where someone was scared and hurting and knew exactly what to do. They were calm when everything else was chaos. They carried other people's worst days on their shoulders and still showed up the next morning with the same steady hands. He told his mother at 10 that he was going to be a heart surgeon. A cardiothoracic surgeon, he specified, because even at 10 he had learned that precision mattered. She was right to worry. After he presented as an Omega, the school counselor suggested he look into nursing instead. His biology teacher, an alpha who meant well and therefore did more damage than any outright bigot, told him that Omegas often struggled with the sustained pressure of medical decision-making. 3 college pre-med programs waitlisted him with polite letters suggesting alternative career paths that might better suit his designation. Every door his mother had feared would closed. Caleb kicked them open anyway. It cost him his body. His heats came every 4 months, and each one was a week he could not afford to lose. Medical school did not pause for biology. Residency did not care about designation. So he loaded up on suppressants. Maximum dose. Sometimes more. He studied through the cramps, through the fever spikes, through the nights when his body screamed at him to stop and nest and rest. He refused. The cardiothoracic surgery exam was in 3 days. He did not have a week to give. His hands would shake during the worst of it, and he would grip his pen tighter and keep writing. He kept a heating pad under his desk during lectures. Nobody knew, because he wore oversized hoodies and sat in the back of every room. By his second year of medical school, his endocrinologist told him that the long-term suppressant use had likely damaged his heat cycle permanently. Shorter windows, reduced fertility, higher risk of complications if he ever came off the medication. Caleb filed that information away and kept studying. He got into cardiothoracic surgery. It took everything he had. 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of medical school, 6 years of integrated cardiothoracic surgery residency, 2 years of fellowship, 16 years of training after high school. He finished at 30, and Harborview Medical Center in Seattle offered him an attending position in their cardiac surgery department before the ink on his board certification was dry. But before all of that, before the refusal became a lifestyle, there was Cale. They met in sophomore chemistry. Assigned as lab partners because Mrs. Park seated students alphabetically, Nolan and Northwood, side by side at a black lab bench that faced the windows. Cale was already an alpha who made rooms reorganize themselves around his presence. Tall, quiet, precise in his movements. He did not speak often, but when he did, people listened. He had an academic intensity that bordered on obsessive, and everyone knew he was going to be a surgeon. Not because he talked about it, he never talked about it, but because the way he held a scalpel in dissection lab made the teacher stop and watch. Caleb had expected arrogance. He got something worse. He got kindness. Cale just treated him like a lab partner. No questions about why an omega was in advanced chemistry. No hovering protectively over the volatile compounds, which is something most alphas did without thinking, a reflexive lean that made Caleb want to scream. No scenting the air when Caleb's suppressants wore thin near the end of a long day. He just showed up, did his half of the work, and expected Caleb to do his. Caleb had never been more attracted to anyone in his life. "You're staring at the titration like it insulted your family," Cale said one afternoon, 3 weeks into their partnership. His voice was low. He never raised it. He never had to. "It's off by 0.2 milliliters, and I cannot figure out why." "Because you're overcompensating on the drop speed." Cale reached over and adjusted the burette stopcock. His fingers were precise. Their hands did not touch, but Caleb felt the proximity like a brand. Slower. Let gravity do the work. The solution turned pink. Perfect endpoint. Caleb looked up, and Cale was watching him with an expression that had nothing to do with chemistry. That was the beginning. What happened over the next year and a half was slow and dangerous in its subtlety. Cale, saving the seat beside him in every class they shared. Study sessions in the library that ran hours past their usefulness, because neither of them wanted to be the first to leave. Cale's scent, that smoked cedar and frozen ozone, becoming the thing Caleb searched for in every room he entered. It was the night before the SATs when Caleb's suppressant dose hit wrong. A preheat flush crawled up his neck at 9 in the evening. His temperature spiked. His hand started that familiar, hated tremor. And instead of panicking, instead of calling his mother, he called Cale. Cale came. He brought water and a cold towel and sat on the floor outside Caleb's locked bedroom door for 4 hours. He talked about surgical techniques and the migration patterns of Arctic terns and whether the school cafeteria's mashed potatoes were technically a war crime. He talked about everything and nothing, his voice low and steady through the wood, until the flush broke and Caleb fell asleep to the sound of him. They never said it out loud. They should have. Caleb met Cale's father once. Junior year. A Saturday in November. A formal family dinner with 14 guests at a table that cost more than Caleb's father made in a month. Cale's father was Dr. Alistair Northwood, chief of surgery at St. Catherine's Medical Center, the largest hospital network in the state. He sat at the head of the table, and the room bent around him the way every room did when a powerful alpha sat down. The other guests deferred to him. His wife watched his mood before she spoke. Even the serving staff moved differently when he was looking. He was polite to Caleb. That was worse than rudeness. He asked Caleb what his plans were after graduation. When Caleb said cardiothoracic surgery, Dr. Northwood smiled and said, "That is very ambitious for an Omega. I admire your optimism." Then he turned to the guest beside him and did not speak to Caleb again for the rest of the evening. What Caleb did not know at the time was that Dr. Northwood had been planning Cale's future bond since Cale was 14. The arrangement was with the Ashworth family. The Ashworths owned a pharmaceutical supply company that serviced St. Catherine's entire network. Their Omega son, Julian, was the same age as Cale, already in pre-med at Johns Hopkins. The match would merge medical infrastructure and pharmaceutical supply under one bonded family. Dr. Northwood did not make suggestions. He made plans, and he expected them to happen. On the drive home that night, Cale's hands were tight on the steering wheel. "He does that," Cale said quietly. "He decides who matters in the first 5 minutes. And then the rest of the night is just confirmation. I didn't matter. You matter to me. That's not the same thing, and you know it." Cale did not argue. He just drove, and his scent filled the car with smoked cedar so sharp it smelled like something on fire. Then, in January of junior year, the Ashworth arrangement became real. Dr. Northwood told Cale it was time, and Cale went along with it. Caleb watched it happen in slow motion. Cale started leaving school early on Fridays for dinners with the Ashworth family. His phone buzzed with messages from Julian that he tilted away from Caleb to read. One afternoon in the hallway, Caleb saw Cale walking beside Julian's older sister, who was visiting from Baltimore, and Dr. Northwood's hand was on Cale's shoulder, like a brand, possessive and broadcasting. "This is my son, and he is doing what I built him to do." Cale never explained, never pulled Caleb aside. He just slowly made himself unavailable. The library session stopped. The saved seats disappeared. He still showed up the night Caleb had a heat scare during midterms. Still sat outside the locked door with water and bad jokes. But afterward, he left without staying to talk the way he used to. The distance was deliberate. It was agonizing. And Caleb could see it was killing Cale too. But Cale kept doing it anyway. The breakup, if you could call it that, for something that had never been named, happened on a Tuesday afternoon in March. The bleachers behind the football field, where no one went because the wood was rotting, and the view faced the dumpsters behind the cafeteria. "I heard you're meeting Julian's parents next weekend," Caleb said. His voice was flat. He had practiced this conversation in the mirror that morning and decided flat was better than broken. Cale did not deny it. "Yes. So this is real. You and him. My father thinks it's a good match. I asked what you think." Cale turned to look at him. His scent shifted, the cedar sharpening into something almost acrid, the ozone going cold. "It doesn't matter what I think. It matters to me." The silence went on too long. "I can't give you what you want, Caleb." Cale's voice was flat too. Practiced. Like he had also rehearsed this. "I'm sorry." Caleb stood up. His knees felt disconnected from his body. "You could have just said that 6 months ago. Instead of letting me watch you choose someone else in real time." "Caleb." "No." His voice came out steadier than he expected. "You don't get to sit here and apologize while you're actively going through with it. At least own it. At least say you're choosing this." Cale looked at him, and for 1 second the mask slipped. His eyes were red. His scent was in pieces. He looked wrecked. But he kept the truth locked behind his teeth. "I'm choosing this," he said, and his voice broke on the last word. Caleb left. He didn't cry until he was 3 blocks away in his car. Then he cried so hard he had to pull over. Cale did not follow. They did not speak again. 5 months of the same school, the same hallways, and Caleb walked past Cale every day like he was furniture. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Cale left for Stanford in August. Caleb left for Seattle in September. Caleb turned that silence into fuel. He burned through pre-med with a GPA that made his advisors revise their assumptions about Omega academic capacity. He demolished his MCAT. He got into med school at UW, and then into their cardiothoracic surgery program, and then into a fellowship at Harborview that had not accepted an Omega in 17 years. Every rejection, every waitlist, every panel that looked at his designation and saw a limitation instead of a doctor. He outlasted them all. He was good at it. He was extraordinary at it. And if the work left no room for remembering smoked cedar and frozen ozone, well, that was the point. 4 cities, 3 hospital systems, 16 years of training that nearly broke him before it made him. Then Harborview offered him a full attending position in their cardiac surgery department, a major academic medical center in Seattle with a renowned cardiothoracic program and a chief of surgery who did not blink when an Omega applied for a senior attending role. Caleb built a life, a good one, an apartment with windows that faced Elliott Bay, a small circle of colleagues who became friends, a reputation as the surgeon you wanted in the room when things went sideways. He dated occasionally, carefully, a beta graphic designer who was kind but unstimulating, an alpha trauma nurse who was stimulating but territorial in ways that made Caleb's skin crawl. Nothing lasted. Nothing was meant to. His scent, crisp green apple and wet river stone, had become so tightly controlled through years of pharmaceutical management that most people at the hospital forgot he was an Omega. He was not ashamed of it. He was just tired of watching people recalculate what they thought he was capable of every time they found out. Then the chief of surgery called a department meeting. Harborview has been approved for a level 1 trauma center expansion, Dr. Chen announced, which means we're expanding our surgical staff. We've recruited a new attending surgeon from Johns Hopkins. Caleb took a sip of his coffee. New attendings came and went. Dr. Cale Northwood, orthopedic trauma specialist. The coffee turned to ash in his mouth. Dr. Chen continued, oblivious. For those of you who haven't heard of him, Dr. Northwood completed 2 tours as a Navy combat surgeon before finishing his fellowship at Hopkins, where he published 18 papers in 3 years and developed a pedicle screw technique that is now standard protocol in 7 hospital systems. He's 30 years old, and he has already been invited to give the keynote at the National Orthopedic Trauma Conference twice. He is, by most measures, the most sought-after trauma surgeon under 40 in this country. The room murmured. Caleb's fingernails carved crescents into his palms under the table. The staff had been buzzing about Cale for weeks before he arrived. Residents pulled up his publications. Nurses Googled his conference talks. 2 of the attending surgeons had trained with people who trained under him and spoke about his skill, the way surgeons only talk about people who genuinely scare them. The word prodigy was used more than once. It was not inaccurate. Cale had built a career that would have been remarkable for someone 20 years older. Elite training, military service, a research output that would make full professors jealous. But he was also a Northwood. Everyone in the medical world knew that name. His father ran the largest hospital network in the state, sat on boards, and did careers with phone calls. The combination meant that when Cale walked into a room, people both respected him and were careful around him. They admired his hands, and they watched what they said near his last name. It gave him a kind of authority that most surgeons spent decades earning. Cale had it at 30. The name hit Caleb like a closed fist. He kept his face neutral, but his scent flickered for half a second, a flash of green apple, sharper than it should have been, before he locked it back down. Monday came. Cale walked through the doors of the cardiac surgery wing, and Caleb smelled smoked cedar for the first time in 12 years. His hands shook. He hid behind a wall until he could breathe again. Then he went back to work, because that was what he did. The first 2 weeks of avoidance were almost sustainable. Different floors, Different schedules. Different rhythms. Harborview was a big hospital. 700 beds, 12 operating rooms, 4 ICUs. A person could go a long time without seeing someone they were avoiding if they tried hard enough. Caleb tried very, very hard. He took the stairs instead of the elevators. He ate lunch in the cardiac workroom instead of the main cafeteria. He reviewed charts in the dictation nook that faced the wall, so he wouldn't see who walked past the glass doors. But Harborview was also a level 1 trauma center, and trauma did not care about Caleb's avoidance strategies. The first case together was a 19-year-old motorcyclist with a shattered femur who went into cardiac arrest on the table during surgery. Caleb was operating on the fracture when the heart stopped. Caleb was paged for the cardiac emergency. He got the heart beating again while Caleb held the surgical field, the Alpha's hand steady around a retractor, not flinching when the defibrillator paddles came down. They did not make eye contact once. When the patient was wheeled to recovery, Caleb left through one door, and Caleb left through another. This became the pattern. Patient after patient. They existed in the same rooms and communicated in vitals and lab values, and never once addressed the thing between them. The staff noticed. Of course they noticed. "Is there something going on between you and the new orthopedic attending?" asked Mira, the charge nurse Caleb trusted most. She cornered him at the coffee station at 2 in the morning. "No. Really? Because you two have the most aggressive non-eye contact I've ever seen. Like two magnets turned the wrong way. There's nothing going on." Caleb took his coffee and walked away. But something happened that same week that he could not file away as professional. He was charting at 3 in the morning when he reached for his coffee mug and found it warm, full, made exactly the way he drank it, black with 1 sugar, which almost nobody knew because Caleb made his own coffee and did not talk about his preferences. He looked up. Caleb was on the other side of the ward, writing in a chart with his back to Caleb. He did not look up, did not acknowledge it. Caleb wrapped both hands around the mug. His chest did something stupid that he refused to think about. The gossip about Caleb's designation was not new. It had started before Caleb even arrived. Harborview was progressive by hospital standards, but progressive did not mean perfect. There were comments, not always to Caleb's face. A surgical resident who told a colleague in the elevator that he was not comfortable having an omega cardiothoracic surgeon consult on his patients because their judgment shifts with their cycle. A nurse in the break room who said she thought it was brave but risky to have an omega in charge of cardiac emergencies. Dear Vance, one of the senior surgeons who made a habit of asking Caleb's opinion during rounds and then rephrasing the exact same answer to the group as if he had come up with it himself. Caleb handled it the way he had always handled it. He was better than them. His numbers proved it. He let his work speak and kept his scent locked down and did not give anyone a reason to question his competence. It was exhausting, but it was familiar. He had been doing it since he was 13. But what Caleb did not know was that Caleb had started handling it too. And when Caleb handled something, it stayed handled. Partly because of his skill. He was the surgeon other surgeons wanted to assist, the name residents put on their fellowship applications. He had published more at 30 than most of the senior staff combined. People respected that, but partly too, because the Northwood name carried weight that nobody at Harborview was eager to test. Caleb never invoked it. He didn't need to. It sat in the background, and people adjusted their behavior around it, whether they admitted it or not. When Caleb spoke, people listened. When he told someone to stop, they stopped. The surgical resident who made the elevator comment found himself reassigned from Caleb's rotation within 48 hours. No explanation given. When the resident complained to Dr. Chen, she told him that rotation assignments were at the attending surgeon's discretion. The nurse in the break room received a curt email from Caleb, CC to the nursing supervisor, noting that commentary on a physician's designation in a shared workspace created a hostile environment, and that he expected it would not happen again. The nurse did not make another comment. Dr. Vance was harder. He was senior staff with tenure. Cale could not reassign him or email his supervisor. So instead, during a joint consult where Vance rephrased Caleb's diagnosis as his own, Cale said, in front of the entire team, "Dr. Nolan already made that call 5 minutes ago. It's in the chart. Should we move on?" Vance turned red. The residents stared at their shoes. Caleb, who had not asked for the intervention and was not sure how he felt about it, looked at Cale across the patient's bed. Cale did not look back. He was already reviewing the next scan, his face neutral, his scent carefully controlled, like nothing had happened. Like he had not just embarrassed a senior surgeon in front of 12 people and meant every word of it. Caleb brought it up in the physician's lounge later that night. "The thing with Vance today, you didn't have to do that. He's been stealing your work in front of your team for months. I know. I've been handling it by being better than him, which you are. But sometimes being better isn't enough when the person above you has decided that your success is actually their success." Cale looked at him. "You can be angry at me for stepping in if you want, but I'm not going to sit in a room and watch someone take credit for your work. That's not something I can do." "Why not? You managed not to talk to me at all for 3 weeks. Something flickered across Cale's face. Not quite a flinch. Closer to a wince. "That was different." "How?" "Because avoiding you was about protecting myself. What Vance does to you is about respect. And you deserve more of it than anyone in this hospital is giving you." Caleb did not have a response for that. He sat with a coffee mug Cale had made him, which he was beginning to suspect was not a random act of kindness but a daily routine, and said nothing, because everything he could think to say felt either too much or not enough. Then the father's interference started, and the gossip got worse. It began with a phone call from outside the hospital. Dr. Alistair Northwood, chief of surgery at St. Catherine's Medical Center, had learned from a colleague that his son had transferred to the same hospital where an Omega named Caleb worked. And Dr. Northwood started making calls. The existing gossip, the kind Caleb had been managing his whole career, suddenly gained new ammunition. A comment in the break room from Dr. Vance, now emboldened, about how the cardiothoracic department was lowering its bar and how not every designation is built for high-pressure medicine. He said it while looking directly at Caleb. A few of the newer residents laughed. A whisper that the hospital board was reconsidering whether Omega physicians should be restricted from leading critical cardiac cases. An anonymous complaint filed about Caleb's emotional volatility during high-stress situations, which was absurd, because Caleb's case reviews were spotless. A memo from the medical director's office about designation-appropriate role assignments that felt targeted, even though it was addressed to the whole department. Caleb did not know where the escalation was coming from. He assumed it was Dr. Vance, emboldened by something, growing bolder than usual. He did what he always did. Worked harder. Let his numbers speak. What Caleb did not know was that the source was not Dr. Vance. It was Cale's father. And Cale was already fighting back. Cale had recognized his father's fingerprints on the first rumor. He knew the language. He knew the strategy. Quiet pressure applied through back channels. The slow, invisible kind of pressure that never left fingerprints but made a person's position worse every week. His father had done it before. Cale had watched him do it to a surgeon who challenged one of his techniques. 3 phone calls, and the man lost his privileges, his funding, and his teaching position within 6 months. So Cale started making his own calls. Quietly. He called former colleagues at Johns Hopkins and asked them to send recommendation letters to Harborview's medical director on Caleb's behalf. Unprompted. He sat down with Dr. Vance in the physician's lounge and told him, in a voice so low and controlled it was almost gentle, that if he heard one more comment about designation and competence in this hospital, he would file a formal complaint with the state medical board. Dr. Vance did not make another comment. But when the anonymous complaint about Caleb's emotional volatility reached Dr. Chen's desk, Cale was in her office within the hour. He did not mention his father. He simply presented Caleb's case statistics, his patient outcomes, his peer reviews, and his published research. Then he said, If you remove the best cardiothoracic surgeon this hospital has because of an anonymous complaint that has no supporting evidence, I will resign. And I will make sure every trauma surgeon in the Pacific Northwest knows why. Dr. Chun looked at him for a long time. Then she shredded the complaint. Cale did all of this without telling Caleb. He knew Caleb would insist on fighting alone if he found out. And against his father, fighting alone was a losing strategy. Cale had grown up watching his father dismantle people. He knew the moves before they happened. The problem was the Bay 4 incident. It was a Friday 2 hours before shift change. A patient in the orthopedic ward went into cardiac arrest after a blood clot from a hip replacement traveled to his heart. Caleb and Cale converged from opposite directions. Caleb was drawing up epinephrine when a patient's body convulsed and knocked the syringe from his hand. He bent to grab it. Cale bent at the same time. Their foreheads nearly collided. Cale caught Caleb's arm to steady him, and his thumb landed on Caleb's wrist, right over the sink gland. The pad of his thumb pressed against the pulse point where green apple and reverse stone were pouring out, uncontrolled, because Caleb's suppressants were 48 hours from wearing off and his body had started its slow, inexorable preheat preparation. Cale's nostrils flared. His pupils dilated. For 1 second, just one, the surgeon's composure fractured into something hungry and desperate and barely contained. Then Cale let go. Stepped back. His face went blank. But his scent was deafening. Smoked cedar and frozen ozone flooding the bay so thick that the attending nurse looked up in alarm. "Syringe," Cale said. His voice was rough. Caleb's hand was trembling when he picked it up. They stabilized the patient in silence. Neither mentioned the grip. That night, alone in his apartment, Caleb pressed his own thumb against the wrist gland where Cale's had been. Hated how his body responded to the memory. 2 weeks after that, Caleb found out about the calls. It happened by accident. He was in Dr. Chin's office for a routine case review when she mentioned casually that the anonymous complaint had been dismissed. "What anonymous complaint?" Caleb said. Dr. Chen paused. "The one about emotional volatility during high-acuity cardiac cases. It was filed last month. Dr. Northwood brought your full record to my office and made a fairly convincing case for shredding it." "Which I did." Caleb stared at her. "Cale came to you about a complaint against me? He didn't tell you?" "No." The cold that settled over Caleb had nothing to do with temperature. He left Dr. Chin's office, walked straight to the surgical wing, and found Cale in the scrub room reviewing scans for an afternoon case. "What complaint?" Caleb said from the doorway. Cale looked up. He did not pretend not to understand. "Someone filed an anonymous complaint about your clinical judgment. I handled it." "You handled it." "I presented your case statistics to Dr. Chin. The complaint had no basis." She agreed. "What else have you handled that I don't know about?" Cale was quiet for a long moment. Then he put down the scans. Dr. Vance made comments about Omega physicians in the break room. "I spoke to him privately." He stopped. The medical director's office circulated a memo about designation-appropriate role assignments. That was not standard language for this hospital. "I traced it to an outside influence and flagged it to Dr. Chin as a conflict of interest." She pulled the memo. Caleb's hands were shaking. Not from anger. Not exactly. Who is the outside influence? Cale met his eyes. "My father." The floor shifted under Caleb's feet. "Your father is trying to get me fired. He's trying to make your position untenable." "There's a difference. And it's worse, because it means there's no single action to fight. Just slow erosion. And you've been fighting it behind my back. Without telling me." "Yes." "How long?" "Since the second week after I transferred." Caleb leaned against the door frame. His mind was doing math he did not want to do. The coffee. The save case statistics. The way Dr. Vance had suddenly gone quiet. The recommendation letters that had arrived from Johns Hopkins, surgeons Caleb had never met. All of it had been Cale. Why? Caleb asked. And the question was not about the interference. It was about all of it. Cale looked at him. The surgeon's composure was gone. In its place was something Caleb had not seen since high school. The boy from the chemistry lab who adjusted the burette's stopcock and watched Caleb like he was the most important thing in the room. Because I lied to you, Cale said. Back in high school, everything I told you on those bleachers was a lie. I never chose the arrangement. I never wanted Julian. Caleb's breath stopped. My father looked into you after that dinner. He pulled records. He found out about your asthma, your heart murmur as a kid. And he told me that if I didn't go through with the Ashworth arrangement, he would call every medical school you applied to and flag your childhood medical history as a liability for high-stress programs. He sits on admissions boards. He golfs with deans. When the chief of surgery at St. Catherine's calls with a concern, people take notes. Caleb could not breathe. You were 17 years old, Caleb. You had spent your whole life fighting for a career that most people told you was impossible. You had wrecked your body with suppressants just to keep studying. And my father was going to take it from you with a phone call. Cale's voice cracked. You were more than good enough. That was never the problem. The problem was that I loved you. And he knew it. And that made you a target. So I went along with the arrangement. I met Julian's parents. I let you watch me do it. I let you think I had chosen someone else. Because I thought if you hated me, you would let go. And if you let go, my father would have no reason to make those calls. And then Cale's throat worked. And then when it came time to actually bond with Julian, I refused. I couldn't do it. He was a good person, and I couldn't look at him without thinking about green apples. My father was furious. He cut me off completely. No funding. No hospital connections. No family. I paid for the rest of my training through Navy surgical scholarships. 4 years of field hospitals. 2 deployments. So you destroyed your own life too. Yes. And you never told me. By then you were already in medical school. You were already becoming the doctor you were meant to be. The threat was gone because my father had no leverage anymore. And I thought you were better off without me. Caleb was quiet for a long time. The scrub room hummed. Somewhere beyond the door, a nurse paged for anesthesia. Normal hospital sounds in a moment that was anything but normal. You let me believe for 12 years that I wasn't worth choosing, Caleb said. His voice was low and very controlled. That's what you did. You let me build my entire adult life around the idea that the person I loved looked at the options and picked someone else. I know. And now you're here at my hospital, quietly fighting your own father behind my back, because you still think you need to protect me. Without telling me, I know how it looks. It looks exactly like what you did 12 years ago. You're making choices for me. You're deciding what I can and cannot handle. You're protecting me instead of trusting me. Cale flinched. It was small, a movement in his jaw, but Caleb saw it. You're right, Cale said quietly. I should have told you about the interference from the start. I should have come to you and said, my father is targeting you, and here is what I know, and what do you want to do about it? I didn't do that because I was afraid you would tell me to stay out of it. And I couldn't stay out of it. Not when it was my father. Not when the damage was my fault. It wasn't your fault. It was his. But the reason he's doing it is because of me. Because 12 years ago, I had feelings for you that I couldn't hide well enough. And he saw them. And he decided you were a threat to his plan. And now he's found out we're at the same hospital, and he's doing it again. That's my fault, Caleb. I brought this to your door. Caleb pushed off the door frame, crossed the scrub room, stood close enough that their scent zones overlapped. Smoked cedar and frozen ozone against green apple and riverstone. And the combination produced something neither of them had smelled in 12 years. Like morning air through an open window. Then we fight him together, Caleb said. Not you behind my back. Not me pretending the rumors are just one biased surgeon. Together. Can you do that? Cale looked at him. His eyes were red. His scent was wrecked. His jaw tightened, and his eyes went glassy, and he nodded once without trusting his voice. Yes, he said. I can do that. The fight against Dr. Northwood started with information. Cale sat with Caleb in the physician's lounge at midnight and told him everything. The Ashworth pharmaceutical arrangement. The 4-year plan. The admissions board seats. The specific mechanism of the threat, flagging a childhood medical history to make an Omega candidate look like a liability. The way his father operated, never through direct action, always through whispers, suggestions, and the accumulated weight of a name that meant something in every hospital on the West Coast. Caleb listened without interrupting. When Cale finished, Caleb said, Your father sounds like a man who has never been told no by someone who meant it. That's accurate. Good. I've been telling people no my entire life. I'm very good at it. Cale looked at him across the lounge, and something in his chest locked into place and did not let go. They started with the institutional damage. Caleb filed a formal records request for any external communications regarding his personnel file. Dr. Chen, who had suspected outside interference for weeks, approved it immediately. The trail led back to 4 phone calls, all from numbers associated with St. Catherine's Medical Center, all to members of Harborview's Medical Advisory Board. Dr. Northwood had not been subtle. He had been confident. Those were different things, and the difference mattered. Caleb presented the findings to the hospital board himself. He stood in a conference room in front of 9 board members and laid out the pattern. The anonymous complaint, the designation memo, the phone calls. He kept his voice level and presented his case statistics, his patient outcomes, his peer reviews, and his published research. Then he said, The question in front of this board is whether Harborview Medical Center makes staffing decisions based on physician performance or based on phone calls from someone who doesn't work here. The board voted unanimously to open an ethics investigation into the external communications. Dr. Northwood's name was formally flagged. When Caleb walked out of that conference room, Cale was leaning against the wall in the hallway, arms crossed, waiting. How did it go? Cale asked. Unanimous. I could have told them that. Cale was trying not to smile and failing badly. I know. But it needed to come from me. Yes, it did. He paused. You were incredible in there. I know. Cale laughed, short and surprised, like the sound had escaped without permission. It was the first time Caleb had heard him laugh since high school, and the sound hit him somewhere he was not prepared for. The romance did not restart with a grand gesture. It restarted with proximity. Now that the secret was out, now that they were fighting the same fight and sitting in the same lounge at midnight and going over the same documents, the careful distance collapsed. Cale brought Caleb coffee every morning, and Caleb stopped pretending it was not the best part of his shift. They ate lunch together in the cafeteria without pretense. The staff stopped whispering and started smiling. Mira cornered Caleb at the nurse's station and said, Finally, the weather system is clearing up. The first time Cale touched him on purpose was 3 weeks after the scrub room confrontation. They had just lost a patient. It happened sometimes. Not often. But when it did, it hit hard. They were standing in the hallway outside not talking, the way you do after a case that went wrong. Caleb's hands were shaking from the adrenaline drop. He pressed them against his thighs, trying to steady them. Cale reached over and took both of his hands in his. He didn't say anything, just held them. His surgeon's grip was warm and firm and certain. Caleb stood there in the fluorescent hallway of Harborview Medical Center and let an alpha hold his shaking hands, and did not pull away. I looked you up, Cale said. Not looking at him, looking at their hands. Every couple of months. Your publications. Your case reports. That profile piece about Omega cardiothoracic surgeons. I read all of it. He paused. I just needed to know you were okay. That the whole thing hadn't been for nothing. Caleb's throat was tight. Was it enough? No. Cale's voice was rough. It was never enough. Not even close. He squeezed Caleb's hands once, gently, and then let go and walked away. Caleb stood in the hallway for a long time, looking at his hands, which had stopped shaking. The first kiss happened in the on-call room 4 days later. Caleb had fallen asleep after a double shift. He woke to Cale sitting on the floor beside the bed, his back against the frame, his white coat draped over Caleb's shoulders. The room smelled like smoked cedar and frozen ozone. And Cale, how long have you been here? Caleb's voice was thick with sleep. A while. Caleb reached down and tugged the collar of Cale's scrub top. Cale looked up, and Caleb pulled him closer until their faces were level on the narrow bed, close enough that their breath mixed. Get up here, Caleb said. There's barely room for one person on that bed. I know. Cale climbed onto the narrow mattress, and they fit together the only way the space allowed. Caleb's back against Cale's chest, Cale's arm around his waist. Their legs tangled. Cale's face pressed into the curve of Caleb's neck. When his lips grazed the scent gland there, Caleb's entire body tightened. Cale's arm pulled him closer. His breath was warm and unsteady against Caleb's skin. If you keep doing that, Caleb murmured, I'm not going to be able to go back to sleep. Cale's mouth opened against the gland. His tongue pressed, slow and deliberate, against the pulse point, and Caleb's scent flooded out in a rush of green apples, so strong that the whole room smelled like an orchard in summer. Caleb's hips rolled back against him on instinct, and Cale's grip on his waist went bruising tight. The sound Cale made against his neck was low and rough. Caleb felt it travel down his spine and pool somewhere below his stomach. Then don't sleep, Cale said. His voice was wrecked. Caleb rolled over to face him. The bed was too narrow for it. His knee ended up between Cale's thighs, and Cale's hand found a bare strip of skin between Caleb's scrub top and his waistband. His fingers were hot, and they did not stop. Caleb kissed him, with his hand fisted in the front of Cale's scrubs, and Cale kissed him back like he had been starving for it, which he had, for 12 years. Cale's thigh pressed up between Caleb's legs. Caleb gasped into his mouth, and Cale swallowed the sound and pulled him closer. They did not leave that bed until the alarm went off 40 minutes later. Neither of them slept. After that, the walls came down fast. Not all at once. Caleb still carried the hurt. Some days it surfaced sharp and unexpected. But the fight against Dr. Northwood gave them something they had never had in high school, a reason to be on the same side. And being on the same side meant proximity. And proximity between two people whose scents created morning air when they overlapped was a losing battle against attraction. Cale was the same person he had been in high school. Sharp with the world and impossibly gentle with Caleb. He argued with insurance adjusters on the phone with a coldness that made residents clear the hallway. And then 15 minutes later, left a post-it note on the nurse's station counter that said, "Drink this. You skipped lunch again." He stared down an aggressive alpha patient who grabbed a nurse during a psychotic break, his scent flaring hard enough to drop the man's hand before security arrived. And then spent his break sitting next to Caleb, reading a journal article out loud because Caleb had mentioned wanting to review it but not having time. A visiting surgeon from another hospital made a comment during rounds about being surprised to see an Omega running a cardiac surgery unit. He said it casually, like it was an observation. Caleb was already opening his mouth to handle it when Cale's voice cut across the room. Dr. Nolan has the best cardiac surgical outcomes in the Pacific Northwest. If you have concerns about his qualifications, I can pull the numbers. Otherwise, I'd suggest we focus on the patient. Flat. Professional. Not raised even slightly. But his scent filled the room with smoked cedar that made the visiting surgeon take a physical step back. Afterward, in the hallway, Caleb caught Cale's arm. "I can fight my own battles." "I know you can," Cale's voice was quiet. That wasn't about fighting your battle. That was about me not being able to sit in a room where someone talks about you like that and keep my mouth shut. He paused. If that crosses a line, tell me, and I'll stop. Caleb looked at him for a long moment. At the dark eyes that held steady on his. At the jaw that was tight with something that looked like fear. It doesn't cross a line. Cale exhaled, and his sense softened. Just a little. The shift happened at the hospital charity gala. 6 months after Cale transferred. 6 months of coffee and shared midnight shifts and hands that found each other in hallways when no one was looking. 6 months of learning each other again, slower this time, more careful, because they both knew exactly how much it hurt to get it wrong. Cale stood beside Caleb at the event with his hand on the small of Caleb's back. Their scents tangled together without apology. Mira appeared with sparkling water and said, "Finally, you owe me wine for 6 months of atmospheric pressure changes in my cardiac unit." Later, on a balcony overlooking the city, Cale pulled a small box from a jacket pocket. Inside was a pair of surgical loops, custom fitted with Caleb's prescription, and engraved on the bridge with a date. The date of their first chemistry lab. "For when you need to see the things other people miss," Cale said. Caleb turned them over in his hands. Precise. Careful. Like everything Cale did when it mattered. "This is incredibly specific and thoughtful, and I'm going to cry. Which I want you to know I find very inconvenient at a work event. I'll block the view." "With what?" Cale stepped between Caleb and the glass doors, shielding the balcony from the crowd inside. "With me." Caleb grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him down. The kiss was not gentle. Caleb's back hit the balcony railing, and Cale crowded against him, one hand gripping the rail on either side of Caleb's hips. Caleb's fingers found the back of Cale's neck. His nails dragged lightly against the skin there, and the sound Cale made against his mouth vibrated through Caleb's ribs. Cale's mouth left his and traced down his jaw to the spot just below his ear. Caleb's head tipped back, cold night air on his throat. Cale's warm breath on his scent gland. His hand moved from the railing to Caleb's hip, pulling them flush. "We're at a work event," Caleb managed. "I know. There are glass doors 3 feet behind you." "I know." Cale's lips brushed the gland again. Caleb's fingers dug into his shoulders. "Say the word, and I stop." Caleb did not say the word. He pulled Cale's mouth back to his and kissed him until the sound of applause from inside the gala broke through. They separated with their scents so tangled that the entire balcony smelled like morning air. Cale's lips were swollen. Caleb's collar was askew. Neither of them could stop smiling. Then Dr. Northwood found out. There was no confrontation. No dramatic discovery. Just a photograph. Someone at the gala had posted a group photo to the hospital's social media page. And in the background, partially visible through the glass doors, were Caleb and Cale on the balcony. Cale's hand on Caleb's hip. Their faces close. The context unmistakable. Dr. Northwood saw it within 48 hours, and the slow erosion that had been building for months became a war. The first move was a formal letter to Harborview's board of directors from St. Catherine's legal department, raising concerns about the hospital's cardiac surgery department leadership and suggesting an external review of physician qualifications. It did not name Caleb specifically. It did not need to. Everyone who read it knew who it was about. The second move was worse. Dr. Northwood called in a favor with a member of the state medical licensing board and requested a review of Caleb's prescribing history, specifically his suppressant usage during medical school. The implication was that a physician who would use medication at doses above the recommended limit might represent a judgment risk. The third move was personal. Dr. Northwood called Cale. Caleb was sitting in Cale's office when the call came. He watched Cale's face go still as he listened, watched the smoked cedar in his scent flatten into something cold and hard. Then Cale did something Caleb did not expect. He tapped his phone screen twice, calmly, and set it on speaker. Dr. Northwood's voice filled the office. Controlled. Measured. The voice of a man who had never had to ask twice for anything in his life. He told Cale to end whatever was happening with that Omega. He said the word like it was a job title, not a person. He said Caleb's presence at Harborview was an embarrassment to the family name. He said if Cale did not cooperate, he would escalate the licensing board review and personally call every hospital in the region to ensure Caleb never held a senior position again. Cale let him talk. When his father was finished, Cale picked up the phone and said very quietly, "Thank you. That's the 4th call you've made to me about Caleb in the past 2 months. I've recorded all of them." Silence. The first call, you told me you would use your admissions board seats to flag his medical history. The second, you described your plan to make his position at Harborview untenable through anonymous complaints. The third, you told me you had contacted the state licensing board. And now this one, where you just threatened to blacklist him from every hospital in the region because he's an Omega and you find that embarrassing. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop. You're going to withdraw the licensing review request. You're going to stop calling Harborview board members. And you're going to leave Caleb alone. Because if you don't, I will send these recordings to every medical ethics board on the West Coast, to the press, and to the Ashworth family, who I'm sure would be interested to know that the man who spent 4 years trying to merge their company with his hospital network has been using institutional power to target a physician based on his designation. You care about your reputation more than anything in this world. These recordings would end it. The silence on the other end lasted a long time. You would do that to your own father, Dr. Northwood said. His voice had changed. Smaller. Not afraid, exactly, but recalculating. You taught me how to protect what matters. You just didn't expect me to use it against you. He hung up. His hand was shaking. It was the first time Caleb had ever seen Cale's hand shake. How long have you been recording him? Caleb asked. Since the second call. The first one caught me off guard. After that, he looked at Caleb. I wasn't going to use them unless I had to. But he wasn't going to stop. Caleb reached across the desk and took Cale's shaking hand. Held it the way Cale had held his in the hallway weeks ago. Firm. Certain. Until the trembling stopped. We still let him make his move with the licensing board, Caleb said. I want to beat it clean. On my record. Not because your father backed down. You want to fight it. Even though we could end it right now. I've been fighting people who think my designation means I don't belong since I was 13. Your father is just the latest one. And I want to walk into that hearing and walk out cleared on my own merit. So that no one, not your father, not Dr. Vance, not anyone, can ever say I only kept my position because my alpha made some phone calls. Cale squeezed his hand once. Yeah, he said. I know. That's why I fell for you in the first place. The licensing review came 3 weeks later. Caleb appeared before the panel in person. He brought his full medical records, his prescribing history, his endocrinologist's statement confirming the suppressant dosages were within the range commonly used by Omega medical students, and a complete training record with 0 disciplinary actions across 4 institutions. He also brought his full patient outcome data from fellowship and his first 2 years as an attending. 53 cardiac surgeries, 11 emergency interventions, 0 malpractice complaints, and a patient survival rate that outperformed the national average by 14%. The panel cleared him in under an hour. When Caleb walked out of the hearing, Cale was leaning against the wall in the hallway, arms crossed, the exact same posture as the hospital board meeting weeks earlier. This was becoming a habit. How did it go? Cleared. Unanimous. Again. Cale crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, took Caleb's face in both hands, and kissed him. In the middle of a government building hallway with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and a janitor pushing a mop cart around the corner. I love you, Cale said against his mouth. I've loved you since you told me my mashed potato opinions were a war crime. That was 3 weeks into sophomore chemistry. You loved me for 2 years in high school and never said it. I said it every day. I just used chemistry equipment and bad jokes instead of words. I was 16. I didn't know how to say it out loud. Caleb pulled back. That's terrible. Yeah, but it's true. I know. That's the worst part. He kissed him again. Slower this time. The janitor cleared his throat loudly. They separated. And Caleb laughed, a real laugh, and Cale looked at him like the sound was the best thing he had heard in 12 years. Dr. Northwood did not call again. Not immediately. The silence lasted 2 months. During those 2 months, Caleb and Cale built their life. Something that looked like a real life. Shared meals in Caleb's apartment. Cale learning to cook because Caleb's shifts made regular meals impossible. Caleb coming home to find the apartment smelling of garlic and cedar and the unmistakable smell of someone who had been cooking badly but trying hard. Caleb dragging Cale to the farmer's market on Sunday mornings, watching this precise, contained alpha haggle over the price of heirloom tomatoes with the same intensity he brought to surgical negotiations. One Saturday night, 2 months into their relationship, the movie they were watching stopped mattering. They were on Caleb's couch. Cale's fingertips kept grazing the nape of Caleb's neck every time he shifted. By the third time, Caleb turned his head. You're not watching the movie. I'm watching you watch the movie. It's better. That's unbearably corny. I know. Come here. Caleb climbed into his lap, straddled his thighs on the couch, his knees pressing into the cushions on either side of Cale's hips. And Cale's hands came up to grip his waist with a grip that said he had been thinking about this for much longer than tonight. The kiss started slow. Cale's mouth was warm and unhurried, like he had nowhere else to be. Then his fingers slid under the hem of Caleb's shirt, palms flat against the bare skin of his lower back, and Caleb ground down against him before he could stop himself. Cale groaned into his mouth. His hands spread wider, gripping Caleb's hips and pulling them flush together. Your hands, Caleb said against his lips. I think about your hands all the time. When you're operating. It's becoming a problem. Yeah. Cale's thumbs were tracing circles on his hip bones, just above the waistband. Caleb's brain was going foggy. What kind of problem? The kind where you're placing screws 3 feet away from me, and I can't focus because all I can think about is what those fingers would feel like on my skin. Cale stopped moving. Caleb pulled back enough to see his face. His pupils were blown. His scent had gone thick and dark, the smoked cedar turning smoky, the frozen ozone deepening into something almost electric, and his hands on Caleb's hips had tightened hard enough to leave marks. Say that again, Cale said. His voice was barely there. Make me. Cale flipped them. Caleb's back hit the couch cushions. Cale was over him, one knee between his thighs, the weight of him pressing Caleb into the upholstery. And Caleb's omega instincts went haywire. He arched up against him, pulled at his shirt buttons, got 3 open, spread both palms against his bare chest, and felt his heartbeat hammering under the skin. Cale's mouth found his neck. When his tongue dragged slow and wet across the scent gland, Caleb's back bowed off the couch. A sound came out of him that he would have been embarrassed about if he could think clearly. Green apple flooded the apartment. Cale's answering scent was so thick that Caleb could taste it on his tongue. Bedroom, Caleb managed. Yeah, they barely made it. Cale picked him up off the couch like he weighed nothing. Caleb's legs around his waist, mouth still connected. He felt the shift of muscle under Cale's shirt, the strength in his hands. His entire body went hot. They fell onto the bed together. What happened after that was slow in some places and desperate in others. Hands and mouths and skin and sounds that neither of them had ever made before. Caleb came apart under Cale's hands, and Cale came apart under his. Afterward, they lay tangled together, breathing hard. Caleb's face pressed against the bond gland on Cale's neck, where the smoked cedar scent was warm and rich and smelled like home. The bonding conversation happened on a Sunday morning 4 months later. "I want to bond with you," Cale said over coffee. Direct, unadorned. The same way he stated a diagnosis. "I've wanted it since I was 16. I'm telling you now because I promised to be honest. And pretending I don't want this would be dishonest. That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. It's not a proposal. It's a disclosure. The proposal comes after you've had time to decide. I'm not an alpha who assumes an omega will fall in line because biology says so." Caleb studied him across the kitchen table. The surgeon's hands wrapped around a coffee mug, the dark eyes that held level on his, the scent of smoked cedar and frozen ozone that had become the most grounding thing in his world. "Ask me in 3 months, Caleb said. 3 months. I want to be sure this is a choice, not a reaction." Cale nodded. Did not argue. Did not push. 2 months and 27 days later, on a Wednesday evening, after a long shift where they had managed a 65-year-old with a ruptured aortic aneurysm, and then immediately a teenage athlete with an undiagnosed arrhythmia who collapsed on the field, Caleb walked into Cale's office, closed the door, and said, "Yes." "Yes, what?" "Yes, you have 4 days left on my timeline, and I don't need them." "Yes, I want to bond with you. Because you're the only person who has ever made me feel like my ambition and my designation are not in conflict. Because when we work together, I'm better than when I work alone. And I've never been able to say that about anyone else. Because your hands are the steadiest thing I've ever seen, and I wanted to be the last thing I feel every night." Cale stood, came around the desk, took Caleb's face in both hands and kissed him. "I had a speech prepared for next week," he murmured against Caleb's lips. "I bet it was very clinical. It had citations." Of course it did. They bonded on a quiet evening in December, in Caleb's apartment, with the windows open to the cold Seattle air. Cale undid the top button of Caleb's shirt slowly, his surgeon's fingers careful, reverent, uncovering the scent gland on the left side of Caleb's neck. He pressed his mouth there first, just breathing. Caleb felt the warmth of it all the way down to his feet. Cale paused against his skin, waiting. Caleb pulled him closer by the waist, his fingers hooking into the belt loops of Cale's jeans. "I've been ready for 12 years, Caleb said. "Stop hesitating and do it." The claiming bite was precise. The pain was sharp enough to make Caleb gasp, his hands fisting in the back of Cale's shirt, his body arching into the alpha's chest. Then the pain dissolved into something else. A rush of connection so overwhelming it knocked the breath out of both of them. Caleb's legs buckled. Cale caught him, holding him upright with both arms locked around his waist, his mouth still sealed against the bond mark. Cale made a sound against his neck that Caleb felt all the way through his body. Caleb felt Cale's heartbeat sync with his. Felt the smoked cedar merge permanently with a green apple. Felt the frozen ozone and the river stone combine into that morning air scent that would be their baseline now. Their constant. Oh, Caleb breathed. The bond flooded him with emotions that were not his own. Fear, grief, loneliness. And underneath all of it, running like a current through 12 years of silence, a love so stubborn and so constant that Caleb's knees almost gave out under the weight of it. "You felt all of that," Caleb said. "I feel all of you too," Cale said. His voice was rough. "Every single year of it. I was always extraordinary." "Yes, you were." Cale kissed the fresh bond mark on Caleb's neck. "And now I get to watch." Dr. Northwood reached out 2 weeks after the bonding. Not a phone call. A letter. Handwritten. Addressed to Cale. Caleb was there when Cale opened it. The letter was short. It did not apologize. It did not congratulate them. It said that Dr. Northwood had reviewed the outcome of the licensing hearing and the hospital board investigation. It said that the results were clear and that further interference would be unproductive. It said that the Ashworth family had dissolved the pharmaceutical arrangement 4 years ago, when Cale refused the bond, and that the business relationship between the Ashworth Company and St. Catherine's had survived without the personal merger. It said that St. Catherine's reputation remained intact, and Nat Cale's career trajectory, specifically the national keynote invitations and the growing number of hospitals adopting his surgical techniques, reflected well on the family name, regardless of his personal choices. The last line read, "Your mother would have handled all of this differently." I am aware of that. Dr. Northwood had not become a warm person. He had become a man who could do math. The cost of fighting had passed the cost of stopping, and he had chosen to stop. Cale read the letter twice, set it down, looked at Caleb. "He's never going to like me," Caleb said. "No, he's not. Can you live with that? I lived without you for 12 years. I can live with your father being difficult." Those two things are not in the same category. Caleb picked up the letter. "Read the last line again. Your mother would have handled all of this differently." Something in that sentence was as close to regret as a man like Dr. Northwood would ever get. It was not enough, but it was the end of the war, and that was something. "I want to meet her," Caleb said. "Your mother. I want you to tell me about her." Cale was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, small and real. "She would have loved you. She was an Omega. Did I ever tell you that? No. She was pre-med when she married my father. She dropped out to raise me. Never said she regretted it, but I think she did." He paused. "She would have been furious at my father for what he did to you." Caleb leaned into Cale's side. The bond hummed between them, steady and warm. "No more closed doors," Caleb said. "No more closed doors," Cale agreed. One evening, almost a year after Cale's arrival at Harborview, they were sitting on the couch in Caleb's apartment. Cale was reading a surgical journal. Caleb was reviewing patient charts on his laptop. The rain was falling outside their windows, steady against the glass. Their bond hummed between them. "Cale, I have a question." "Go ahead." "That night, this 80s, when you sat outside my door for 4 hours, were you already in love with me then?" Cale set the journal down. "I was in love with you from the moment you told me my mashed potato opinions were a war crime. That was week 2 of chemistry lab. Week 2. You loved me for 2 years, and went along with an arranged match, and broke my heart, and joined the Navy, and showed up at my hospital 12 years later." Cale winced. "When you say it like that, it sounds insane." "It is insane. I know." He pulled Caleb closer. "But you're here. That's the part one still can't believe." Caleb closed his laptop, moved across the couch until he was pressed against Cale's side. Their scents merged into that morning air that meant home. "I love you," Caleb said. "I've loved you since you treated me like a lab partner instead of a designation. And I'm going to spend the rest of our lives making sure you never have to sit outside a door again." Cale kissed the top of his head. His arm tightened around Caleb's shoulders, and something in his scent, that smoked cedar and frozen ozone, settled into something warm, something that felt like finally. Outside, the Seattle rain fell on the city that had given them both a second chance. Inside, 2 surgeons who had spent 12 years being extraordinary apart discovered something they should have known all along. They were better together. In the operating room. In the cardiac unit. In the quiet, ordinary, extraordinary life they were building. One steady-handed day at a time.